Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lincoln Live and this sunny afternoon where we're all on lockdown, but I just wanted to say a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Farhan Ahmed. I'm from the University of Lincoln and in particular the Lincoln International Business School, and I have the great honour today of spending the next 25 to 30 minutes with you to discuss COVID and the implications for business and households going forward. I just wanted to start off by saying I hope this communication finds you all safe, well, and above all, healthy. And I know at these difficult times we are all juggling multiple things in our lives, but I hope the next half an hour is an opportunity for you to just sit back and hopefully take on board one or two points we have with regards to COVID and what implications this will have for the wider economic environment and in particular businesses that we may work in, or homes for that matter, that we have to continue to run during the crisis and obviously post-crisis as well. Before I begin to address those topics in detail, I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce myself formally and tell you what I do at the university. As I said, my name is Farhan Ahmed. I've been in the Lincoln International Business School since 2003, and prior to that, I'm very privileged to say that I am also alumni of the university, having done my undergraduate degree also in the Lincoln International Business School. During my time at the university, which is numbering a considerable number of years now, I've had the great honour of teaching both undergraduate, postgraduate students in a range of business-related subjects. But in particular, my area of speciality and expertise is within aviation, which has been very topical at the present time, and as such has allowed me to work with students from a range of degree disciplines within that business context. As you will probably notice, there is an opportunity to answer questions at the bottom of this live feed. Please feel free to send questions during my talk. I will make every effort to address them within my talk as I go along, but if I can't do that, I will obviously address them collectively at the end as well. So please don't be shy. Ask as many questions as you wish on any subject related to today's talk, and I'll endeavour to make sure that I'm able to respond to them collectively. The last thing I just wanted to say is at the university, we're very privileged to have a student base and a staff base that is able to contribute to a range of subject areas. And I would ask that there are a number of talks lined up in this series of Lincoln Live talks, which may be of interest to you. So please make sure that you take a look at the forthcoming talks, as there are some fantastic speakers and subjects coming in due course. So without further ado, I want to move on to my subject area of COVID and the implications for the wider economy, but also in particular for businesses and our respective households. So I think it's a very well-known fact now that COVID has become a pandemic of great proportions and has impacted more than 175 countries and territories at the last count, sadly causing considerable human death toll. In some cases, this mirrors previous virus outbreaks such as Ebola, Zika, and SARS going further back. As a result of this, there are, from a business perspective, some areas in which we have learned from when we had these previous crises. And as a result of that, we have been able to articulate and generate knowledge from those previous crises to help from an economic and business viewpoint. Now, in particular, rather than going into considerable amounts of detail in terms of statistics, I wanted to highlight some of the considerable implications that there will be during and post this particular crisis. And I think one that we are all sadly to a certain extent impacted by, or will know people that are impacted by, is the issue, firstly, and probably most significantly, of rising unemployment rates. If you look globally at the moment, the one considerable point that all economies are reporting is that there is a spike in those individuals reporting that they are no longer able to work and therefore claiming necessary unemployment support as a result. Now, this is something that is inevitable when we have considerable crisis such as this, whether they be health related or anything else. I think the key thing is that the one thing we need to keep in mind is that inevitably unemployment rates will rise and will continue to rise in the short term until there is an opportunity for us to re-engage and get the circular flow of income moving again. And it is only once the circular flow of income from our households into businesses who then spend that money further forward will we be able to bring that unemployment rate down. Now, this will be a global issue. We are not looking at individual countries, we are looking at global rising unemployment rates. If you look at the United States, for example, they have very recently in the last few days recorded the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression. If you look at the UK in particular, and the context of this particular talk, we have increasing numbers of unemployed at the moment, despite the government initiatives that have been put in place. But this is an inevitable impact of when you have a considerable crisis such as this. And that is reflected purely by the considerable number of businesses that have sadly collapsed or are on the verge of collapse in some cases. Jules, the high street retailer, for example, Debenhams, for example, has very recently indicated an intention to go into administration. And then you've got larger organisations within the transport sector as well, for example, such as Flybe, who have also indicated that they are now, unfortunately, no longer going to be operating. How do we fix this then? So I've alluded to something known as the circular flow of income. And the way in which this operates, and the one way in which we can bring unemployment rates in check and hopefully down as we go further forward, is once we are able to move and out of our homes and we are able to engage fully within the economy once more, as we previously did, that is a good sign. And we would be encouraged as individuals to go out there and spend our incomes as much as we are able to do so within reason, and as a result of that, try to get the money moving around our economy once more. As money moves around the economy, that naturally creates the desire for more people to be employed and the need, therefore, for people to be taken on by companies and organisations. And this can be from anything, from small-scale cafes, for example, to going on considerably priced holidays. Everyone is in the same economy and therefore needs individuals such as you and I to be out there spending money. The second point I wanted to make relates more significantly in terms of an implication for homes, is in particular how we are able to a certain extent, recover as an economy, and in particular, and I want to relate this particular point to households as we move forward. And I think the key thing that I wanted to highlight in this particular aspect is there will be needed for support. There will inevitably be something that will be required by not only households, but by businesses as well. And that support will have to come primarily from governments, which will probably come from inevitably banks, for example, through loans and subsidies of some form. As a result of this, the point I'm trying to make in this second case is that there will be initiatives in place, and many of you would have heard, whether you are employed by an organisation or self-employed, the government is in the process of putting into implementation a number of initiatives to help individuals at the moment. These will inevitably increase over time. And as we come out of lockdown and as we re-engage with economy and to a certain extent normality returns to our lives, we will see greater initiatives in place to stimulate the economy and to get that economy given, to a certain extent, a jump start, as you would a car, for example, in order for things to start to move forward once more. Once again, though, I would reiterate that this doesn't happen overnight. These are initiatives that take time, and whilst there are considerable financial packages on offer at the moment, they will be increased inevitably, and as a result of that, we will see greater initiatives being implemented in the future as well. The third, and to a certain extent, the last considerable impact that I want to highlight is impacts on households, i.e. you and I. We're in our households at the moment. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to go out there and effectively engage within the economy as we would. So what are the impacts at a local level within our houses? Well, there are a considerable number. There are initially, as I've already described, the losses of jobs, which causes considerable impacts. But actually, that then has a multiplier impact further down the line. So, for example, due to the fact that many of us sadly might have lost our jobs or taken considerable pay cuts in order to keep our jobs, that will have implications in terms of being able to pay our bills. And that will have implications in those individuals then being able to pay their bills. Now, this is a considerable problem because when we start to develop an element of financial insecurity within our homes, the natural reaction we have is to close in, i.e. not to spend anything at all. And that is exactly what we don't need at this present time. Because at the present time, we need our economy to get going again. So as households, and as I previously alluded to in this talk, households to a certain extent need to just move forward in terms of trying to stimulate the economy moving forward. So as difficult as it might be at the present time, and as difficult as it might be in the coming weeks and months ahead, we as individuals and active participants within society should do our very best to play our part in stimulating the economy going forward. And that begins at the household level and emanates outwards. So now that I've highlighted three major impacts on the economy, on businesses and households, how can we move forward? Because there must be a solution. There must be initiatives, there must be actions that we can put into place that are effectively going to help us improve as we go forward. And I wanted to highlight something which is quite well documented in the literature and has been a piece of work that has been refined over the years as we've effectively moved from one crisis to another, whether that be health or financial. And it is effectively something which I like to refer to as 5 horizons of recovery to a certain extent. Now, at the present stage, we have within these 5 horizons, the key elements within that are resolve, which is the first one. And this is essentially when a crisis hits, such as COVID-19, we have to firstly make sure that we address the immediate challenges that face us in terms of institutions, in terms of households, and in terms of businesses. Now, in some cases, that might be as basic as covering this particular month's worth of wages. And we therefore need to address the most pressing concerns that we have, resolve those key aspects going forward. The second R of the 5 horizons of recovery is resilience. And this is something that has been talked about considerably in the media in the last few days, i.e. how can we increase resilience, how can we become a bit more resilient when we have considerable issues impact us in everyday business and life. Now, in this case, there is definitely an opportunity for organisations to look at how they can improve their operations, their businesses, in order to become more resilient and have an element of, to a certain extent, safety in terms of responding to major crisis. And I think as we move forward, this second point of resilience especially will become even more prominent moving forward. And we will all, as organisations, discover more ways to become resilient, and as individuals for that matter, and households, we will also look to become more resilient as well. And in many cases, this is being done already in the way in which we are proactively operating at the present time. The third R is return, in terms of the 5 horizons of recovery, and in particular, how we return to business once this crisis is over. And please rest assured that it will be over, and when it is over, we will resume normality again. And that is when we will all return to our organisations. And when we return to our organizations, what will that look like? Because inevitably, it will not be what it was before we left. So when we return, we need to make sure that we plan as organizations, as households, to make sure that we have that element of resilience that I mentioned beforehand, and make sure that that element of return to our workplaces is therefore made as smooth as possible, but also acknowledging the fact that things will be different going forward. The fourth and fifth pillars of the horizon, the 5 horizons of recovery, are reimagination and reform. And I like to talk about these fourth and fifth pillars collectively as one. Because as I've alluded to a few moments ago, when we do go back to work, things will be very different. And we will operate in different ways. And as a result of that, we will inevitably have to reimagine and reform our policies, our procedures, and the way in which we conduct business. And many of us are doing this already. By virtue of the fact that I'm sat in my kitchen today, on my online systems, we are effectively reimagining how we work, and we are effectively reforming the way in which we work. And at the university, for example, we have been very keen to make sure that we reimagine and reform our working environments to the extent that we are offering online lectures and seminars in order to continue business as usual to a certain extent. I think if these 5 pillars or R's of reform, or 5 pillars of horizons of recovery, are implemented, we will see ourselves in the new business environment operating as well as we possibly can. And the most important thing is that we learn from what we've done and therefore move forward accordingly. So those are the things I wanted to talk to you all about today. And I hope some of the things that I've said to you have been useful and insightful to you. What I want to do now is, I notice that there are a considerable number of questions coming in, which I'm really pleased to see. So I wanted to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes at the very most addressing some of those questions as we go through. So excuse me as I scroll through some of the questions. I'll try to go right back to the top again. So first of all, let me go to Chris Headland's question on what can small companies which have limited surplus capital do to support employment and economy at this time? Well, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, if you look at a majority of the news reports, and if you look at the majority of the initial academic material that's been published, it is SMEs that have been impacted the most. I know we hear about the likes of Flybe, Jules, Debenhams, and so forth being mentioned in the media, but in fact, the small, medium-sized enterprises up and down our country are those that are impacted most significantly, because like you quite rightfully have pointed out, they have limited to next to no surplus capital. And as a result of that, what you tend to see is, to a certain extent, they have to implement plans going forward which will allow them to have surpluses in stock. Now, to a certain extent, this is not easy, and it will require help in the longer run. But the key point is that they need to be a bit more resilient, and if they can, they need to reform and reimagine the ways in which they do business in order to hopefully create an element of surplus, which they can then use to help to stimulate the economy. Next question along is from Paige. Thank you for your question, Paige. Looking at other epidemic outbreaks, do we know how long the impact of this will be on the economy? That's a very good question. And unfortunately, at times like this, it's very difficult to imagine how long things will last for. If we were to look back at the last major recessions, we tend to notice that they do tend to have an impact for a good couple of years. That's inevitable. The impact initially might be most severe, and as we move further away from that particular crisis, we tend to notice that things get a bit better. So if I was to be asked to put a number, I would say a good couple of years. But essentially, what we need to be looking at is trying to stimulate the economy, like I say, as quickly as possible. The quicker we do that, the quicker we get our government stimulus plans into place, and the quicker we as individuals and active participants go into the real world and start to spend money, that will be a good thing for the economy and help to reduce its impact. Ahmed, thank you for your question. Once the pandemic is over, do you think countries' economies will boost or suffer from loans? And that's a very good question, because inevitably loans will play a considerable part. I think what we tend to see post-crisis is there tends to be inevitably an upward shift, because we go out there, we spend money, we have stimulus plans in place. And as a result of that, we do tend to see a bit of a boost, which is a very important thing to acknowledge. Hannah, most sectors of the economy have been impacted by COVID-19. Do you think there are any tips for small business enterprises? Again, a very good question on SMEs, which is an important thing to acknowledge. I think the key thing they need to acknowledge is going forward, it's good for SMEs, if they can, to try to develop reserves in surplus, or have, to a certain extent, alternative ways in which they can move to operate, whether that be online or whether it be something completely new and reimagined, because that alternative way of doing business will keep them afloat, and that's the most important point. Alexander, thank you for your question. What's your prediction about which field will rise after COVID-19? That is a brilliant question. I think there are a number of industries that will inevitably do well. I think anyone with any skills within resilience and restructuring organizations will be very much in demand. But if I was to talk about industries as a whole, I hope all industries see a boost, because I think there will be a need for all elements of the economy to do well. And hopefully if we can boost as many areas of our economy as possible and as many industries as possible, that is good for our entire economy. So I hope we see positive aspects in all areas of our economy. Victoria, thank you for your question. What impact will this pandemic have on the aviation industry? We are already seeing some airlines downsizing. Now, this is an area I have great interest in, and what we've seen is, in terms of airline seat numbers, we have seen a reduction in some sectors of 80% of the airline seats that were previously available, and that is astonishing. In all my time that I've researched aviation, in all my time that I've been interested in aviation, I've never seen anything like it. The closest, like I say, that I saw previously was maybe the SARS epidemic, and prior to that, 9/11, the impact that had. But I fear the worst for the airline industries. I think we'll see more airlines go out of business, and unless we go down the US model where emergency loans are being provided to airlines, sadly, we will see airlines suffer in this context, and unfortunately a number will go out of business, as Flybe has already done so. But I think there could be, in some cases, some big airlines that we will see, sadly, ceasing operations. Donna, thank you for your question. You've highlighted a question on the cruise industry, which is actually a very, very good one indeed. I think it's in a very similar vein of thought as the airline industry. I think they have very similar DNA makeups to a certain extent. And I think what we'll also see in the cruise industry is a reduction in passenger numbers in due course. Unfortunately, what we've seen with the cruise industry in the last few months, weeks and months, I should say, is that they've actually been at the heart of the COVID pandemic. And unfortunately, I think that will be a reputational thing that they will also have to deal with going forward. But unfortunately, I think it's in a very similar state of place as is the airline industry at the moment. Okay, just going through the questions once again. Sorry if I missed your question. I will endeavour to answer it. I'm scrolling through on my phone. Okay, so Tracy, thank you for your question. I rely on investments as retired in health, but will now have it halved. What can I do to live? That is a very, very difficult question indeed. Unfortunately, investments are always significantly impacted when we have major pandemics and epidemics such as this. I think the key thing in your case, to a certain extent, when it comes to investments, is I hope this is the case in terms of your investments, that they are spread. Because the more spread they are, the more likelihood is that you will see return on some, if not the majority of them. But it's a very difficult time from an investment perspective, and the fact that the interest rates at the moment are so low is an indicator of that as well. Kirsten, you highlight an exceptionally good question. Your question is in regard to equality, women and minority marginalised groups. I'm just trying to extend your question on my phone. I presume it's to do with pay. Just one moment. Yes. So, yeah, you're right. In terms of particular groups, the government has been very focused on particular elements. And what we have seen is there are certain groups that haven't been addressed. I think what we will see in terms of government stimulus packages going forward is that they will become much more inclusive as we go forward. At the moment, they are very targeted because they are particularly aiming at particular groups. I think as we start to come out of this crisis, what you will notice is that we will see much more inclusive stimulus packages, which will definitely, in my opinion, include the minority groups, marginalised communities, women for that matter as well. And I think that is absolutely vital. So I do hope that is reflected. That is important. Kirsten, you raise a very good point. Your follow-up question as well is in regards to that you've been contacted by a number of colleagues, predominantly women, who are concerned that they are discriminated against, are more likely to lose their jobs because when they are trying to work and homeschool, it's a struggle. It is a very valid point that you make. And incidentally, there's a report by the Institute of Fiscal Studies that only came out within the last week. And the two groups that they highlighted was young people aged between 20 and 30 are going to be the most impacted by COVID in terms of the economic impact, and women. That was the second group highlighted. And that's where I come back to my previous answer, where I say, hopefully, as we move forward, as we come out of this crisis, we will see stimulus packages, but also policies and policy makers coming up with particularly targeted initiatives aimed at younger people, those between 20 to 30 who are more likely to be impacted, and also women, to help them. Because you're right, these are individuals that unfortunately often take the brunt of this. Megan, thank you for your question. How can the experienced economy overcome the impact of COVID, the lack of expendable money on families to enjoy? You make an exceptionally good point. Unfortunately, the tourism, the events, the experience economies are considerably impacted by this. And it is a sad state of affairs, because one of the first few industries that was impacted, for example, was the gig economy. And there were a number of articles which highlighted how many within the gig economy were the first to sadly lose their jobs. I think once again, it comes back to, once we emerge out of this pandemic and we are able to engage within our previously normal lives as much as possible, it is important that we try to stimulate those economies and we make a valid attempt to make sure we go on holidays, to make sure that we are able to go to restaurants, to gigs, to the theatre, to the museums, because these industries rely upon us to go out there and actively engage with them. And I think, once again, I would like to reiterate, as active participants within society, we must do all we can to assist those sectors of the economy. Okay, I'm scrolling through a few more questions. There is a considerable number. Considerable number of questions. Sorry, I'm just... Right, okay. So the last one that I've scrolled down to is Alexander. How can the pandemic will affect the European Union countries' economy specifically? And the industry between... an industry field between them and other sides. Okay, so I think the EU is a very interesting question because I think what we're going to see is, and I hate to mention the B word, Brexit, but we do come back to that. I think what we will see is, in terms of deals with the European Union, I think we will see some positives there. I think there will be a real initiative for us to actually engage within our European Union partners, in the sense that prior to Brexit, we had very good trading agreements with a number of them. I think we will try to go back to that to a certain extent. Obviously, Brexit is in place, and that is something that hangs over us to a certain extent. Okay, I'm just going to try to scroll through a few questions that I might have missed in the last few moments. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to highlight. There is a question online which I saw a few moments ago. There we are, from Tori. Thank you for your question on online businesses. Do you think the use of these will keep things afloat? I think so. I think one of the pillars of the 5 horizons of recovery that I was talking about earlier was reimagination and reform. And I think what some organizations have done exceptionally well is they reimagined very quickly and they reformed very quickly. And a prime example of that was taking their business from face-to-face facing businesses to online businesses. And I think this will go a considerable way to keeping a number of organizations afloat. How long they can continue to do that, obviously, is a difficult question to answer, but I think it's a very positive thing that many businesses have done. And if you look at the way in which business is being done at the moment, through Teams, through Zoom, through Skype for Business, for example, this just shows you how resilient we are at times and how we can reimagine and how we can reform our ways in doing business so quickly. And I really do hope that we continue to do business online in the short term, most certainly, because that is a lifeline for many businesses. So that's a brilliant question. Okay, I'm just scrolling to the bottom of the questions again. Okay. Very good question on global supply chains and the impact of COVID on them. It's a very, very interesting question. What will happen to global supply chains? And interestingly, within the business school, we've been looking at this particular area. We're very blessed with a number of colleagues that have expertise within this. And the one thing that they have said on a number of occasions is that supply chains are actually very resilient. And the one thing that we need to keep in mind is that those supply chains need to be re-engaged, and need to be re-engaged very quickly post-crisis, because the quicker we do so, the more likelihood is that they will continue to be a good supplier of information, knowledge and products in the longer term. It's a very good question. Okay, I hope I've covered the majority of questions. I have gone through them in a fair bit of detail, but I do hope that if you did have a question, I've been able to answer that to a certain extent. One thing I would like to say is that if you do have any further questions, please don't be shy in contacting me directly. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions on a one-to-one basis. I will put my email address into the chat below, so please don't be shy in coming forward and asking any questions on a one-to-one basis. That's not a problem at all. I think on that note, we've gone a few minutes over, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope, like I've just said, that you found some of the points that I've made today useful and reassuring as well, because in these uncertain times and in these alien environments that we're operating in at the moment, I think the key thing to remember is once we do come out the other side of this crisis, there is much to be positive about as organizations, as households and as individuals, and we should do everything we can to focus on the positives at this time. So on that note, I want to say thank you again for joining me, and I want to also say I hope you all stay healthy, safe and well, and continue to take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to being in contact with you all again very soon.